Welcome back to Stab the Dragon, episode number 57, whiskey review number 31, as we take a look at Herman Marshall Texas Rye. This is the Total Wine Single Barrel Reserve. Now, last time we met for a whiskey review, I reviewed the Herman Marshall Texas Bourbon Distillery Reserve, and that was at 117.5 proof, I think. At the end of that review, I stated that I would review the Herman Marshall Rye next. And at that point, I thought that I had a distillery reserve at 117.5 proof for the rye. That is not the case. This is the Total Wine Reserve. So this is a store select barrel, single barrel by Total Wine. So that's what we'll look at today. This is, I get a little confused over some of the labeling on bottles. I'm still relatively new to the whole whiskey thing as well as the whiskey review thing, and so learning to know what exactly to look for is a process. And so I'm making progress there, but I think I made a mistake last time thinking that this rye was the twin of the bourbon, and it's not. So the quick take, I'm giving this rye a score of 88 points. Letter grade, A-. My recommendation, I really like this whiskey a lot more than the Distillery Reserve Bourbon, that 117.5 proof that I did last time. Now this is a very good rye, but it's missing some of that Texas char flavor that I've come to know and love. And so this is called a Texas Rye, but it doesn't taste like a Texas Rye. It tastes like a rye. It just doesn't have that Texas funk. Now, this is a very good rye whiskey, but not as much of a Texas flavor as I'd hoped. So if you love a good rye whiskey, I think you should try this Herman Marshall Texas Rye. And if you're a bit averse to the Texas funk thing, because that turns some people off, well, here's a very good Texas rye whiskey that does not have that barrel char funk, okay? So this would stand up well against any other rye whiskey that's out there, I think. If you're drinking your way through the Texas whiskeys, you've got to try this Herman Marshall Rye. If you like a good rye in a cocktail, this one I think has both the strong rye flavor and the strong enough proof to stand up in your favorite cocktail. So all in all, I'm giving this a strong recommendation. So now let's get into the details here. First of all, for the history, Herman Beckley and Marshall Lewis, and Marshall Lewis is of South Africa, but they met here in the Dallas area in a Starbucks and started talking whiskey. They both had a passion for whiskey and began researching pre-prohibition style whiskeys, recipes, methods of distilling, etc. And they formed a partnership, and then in 2010 they started their first distillery, the first distillery here in Dallas County since Prohibition days. So that's a pretty remarkable thing. They started at Dallas Distilleries in Garland, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. And by 2013 they were producing and winning awards. This rye whiskey won a bronze prize from the American Distilling Institute in 2013. Now, in November of last year, 2021, Herman Marshall was sold to Dry County Distilleries. New owners plan to relocate this distillery from Garland to Wiley. They've already got the property. They're in the process of moving. And, you know, if you go to the website, it'll have a picture of Wiley and says things are in process. But everything else, as far as I know, it's still in Garland. The bottle is labeled Garland. The website says they're still distilling in Garland. So this is still a DFW area whiskey. And Wiley is kind of an outlier suburb in northeast of Dallas. So it's still in that area. But, so this is just in the process of moving. And we talked a little bit about that last time and how I think that's how I got that Distillery Reserve bottle of bourbon. So for this rye whiskey, I'm going to say it's a 5 for 5 for history, because it's still pretty cool to be made in the first Dallas distillery opened since Prohibition days. All right, I really like the history here. So let's move on to marketing, bottle, and packaging. This is a flask-shaped bottle, as you can tell, and it's got a rubber stopper up here, but it's also dipped in black wax, and it doesn't have the wax all over the place like, say, Maker's Mark does, but it's wax, and I'm not a fan of the whole wax thing. Maybe it protects the bottles in some way. Maybe it's just a fashion statement. I'm not sure, but I'm just not a fan of the wax bottle caps. You know, just wax everywhere. It's just, I don't know, gets in my way. They use the conventional green on the label here, indicating that this is a rye whiskey. Okay, that label is kind of a bold, straightforward thing. There's nothing really fancy about it. It's not super classy or anything, but it's a nice looking label, certainly. It's noticeable, right? You know, the green label thing here is not an industry standard. It's not a legal requirement, but it is commonplace in the industry. If you've got a rye, you're going to have some kind of green on the label. I've seen at least 1 or 2 rye whiskeys that didn't have that. You know, so like I said, it's not an industry standard. It's just a convention that most people do. Now, this has another label on it. It's got the total wine label here, indicating that this is a single barrel reserve for total wine. And so that's helpful, and that's what I misunderstood when I bought the bottle. But it's a store pick and a single barrel. So, you know, that makes it a little bit special, but also that kind of narrows the field of, you know, having to review this particular barrel or bottle, I guess. The distillery label says handcrafted small batch whiskey right there. And what does that mean? Well, that's really not helpful. It's not a legal thing. It's not even an industry standard thing. There's no real definition to what handcrafted is or what small batch is. You know, so that's just kind of a hoo-ha thing. You know, it makes the customer feel good, I guess. I don't know. It's not even informative. But saying that it's a Texas rye whiskey does give you some information, because A, it's made in Texas, and Texas whiskeys are known for a particular flavor profile that's a bit unique to Texas. So we'll look at that in a little bit. And of course, it's labeling it as a rye whiskey. That there is a legal requirement there. It's got to be at least 51% rye. This is a 750 milliliter bottle, and it's bottled at 46% alcohol or 92 proof. There was another store label that kind of covered up the government warning stuff on the side. I tried tearing it off and made a mess of things there. But what this does say is that it's distilled and bottled by Dallas Distilleries in Garland, Texas. And I find this frequently with whiskeys. The distillery has a separate name from the whiskey company or the whiskey brand name. So like take Buffalo Trace, for instance. Buffalo Trace is the name of the distillery. That distillery makes a whole spectrum of different whiskey labels and brands. And some of those have separate companies. So there's all kinds of legal and professional technicalities that go with that. But Dallas Distilleries is the name of the distillery. Herman Marshall is the name of the whiskey. And if you go to the website, it's Herman Marshall. So there you go. On the back, we find batch number 319R. Right? It's handwritten there in the back. I don't know. You know, trying to show this to you there. There you go. And it's got more hoo-ha stuff like every whiskey bottle's got. It says, enjoy smooth flavor and unique character. I'm not so sure about the unique character thing. Dallas County's first distillery of handcrafted small batch whiskey, patiently aged in new white oak barrels in the great state of Texas. Enjoy the whiskey renaissance with good friends and a dram of Herman Marshall. So there you go. That's the hoo-ha stuff. I've seen a few internet ads, I think, for Herman Marshall, you know, like maybe on my Facebook or something. but probably not for this rye. Okay, ryes are like the redheaded stepchild. Okay, ryes don't get much press at all. There are, however, a few reviews of this rye whiskey out there. The Whiskey Reviewer, that website, gave a very good review, but a lot of it was sourced from Cask Cartel, I believe. In fact, almost word for word in places. So Cask Cartel gave it a pretty good review. In fact, both reviewers gave this a good review. YouTube reviews, not so much. Didn't find any YouTube reviews on this rye whiskey. There's some for the bourbon, but not the rye that I could find. There were some news magazine stories, like there was one from the Houston Press back, like 2015, I think, and it looked at the Herman Marshall Rye, their bourbon, and their single malt, and that was a good press article. And on YouTube, there was one YouTube video that was from a news channel, a local news channel, that interviewed the guys at Herman Marshall, and they explained there are three main whiskeys: the bourbon, the rye, and the single malt, right? And that was a good 3.5 minute news story, so that was actually pretty beneficial. So anyway, rye whiskeys, the stepchildren of the whiskey world at times. So for marketing, bottle, packaging, and all that, I'm still going to give it a 4 out of 5. Composition. This is pretty easy because the article or the news story where they interviewed the guys from Herman Marshall, they talk about their whiskey there, and their bourbon and their rye are real similar. Okay, you've got a 77-23 breakdown. The bourbon is 77% corn, 23 barley. The rye is 77% rye and 23 barley. So they I don't know how they came up with that, but it's working. Okay, at least for the rye. I wasn't real fond of the bourbon, but so 77% rye and 23% barley. And one story I read said that they use locally sourced grains when they're available. Okay, when they can. So that was a little bit iffy there. Other distilleries that I've checked have been much more precise about what kind of grain and where they get their grains from. But they do say here that on the distillery, that interview on the news from the distillery, that this is aged 4 to 6 years in charred white oak barrels, 53-gallon barrels. So, that aged 4 to 6 years, that's pretty interesting. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit when I taste it. But for right now, composition, it's pretty straightforward. I like that. So 14 out of 15. The only improvement would be if we knew exactly where their grains come from. Appearance of this whiskey. Well, here we go. That is a reasonably dark rye whiskey. Okay, so I'm going to say, that is not as dark as something like Balcones, and maybe not as dark as Tawakero, but still, that's going to be a 4 out of 5, I think. 4 out of 5 for appearance. It's got a nice color to it, nice legs. Yeah, 4 out of 5 points. Nosing. Surprisingly, there is not much of a nose on this rye, and it's at 92 proof. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that normally I can smell some rye. This one I really can't. And with these Texas whiskeys, normally I can smell a little bit of that Texas funk. But here, I'm not getting much of anything. And at 92 proof, I would have thought I'd get a good nose. 77% rye. Now, you got to keep in mind that my nosing abilities are poor. My nose just doesn't work very well. But usually with single malts, like scotches, I can smell something. Or, usually I have the most trouble with Kentucky bourbons. But ryes, I can usually smell a little bit. Now, I'm not really getting much of anything here. So But I give, because my nose is so poor, I give a 7 out of 10 for benefit of the doubt on nosing. So that's what this gets. Tasting, the all-important tasting. Rye spice right up front. A little bit of sweetness of caramel maybe, and then it's very spicy. It's got a nice cinnamon burst at the back. This is a nice spicy rye. It's got a lot of really good rye flavor, and it's got that strong cinnamon on the tail end. Stronger cinnamon than most ryes by far. Yeah, really, this is almost in bourbon territory, actually. So it's quite flavorful. Man, yeah, this is really good. I like this. But here's the downside. I'm not getting any Texas funk. Very little at all. Maybe none. To be aged 4 to 6 years in Texas and have no Texas funk, I'm not sure what's going on there. You know, this is not some imported rye. This is made here in Texas, aged here in Texas, and I'm not picking up any of that char. It's a little bit disappointing to be drinking a Texas whiskey and not get that. So how's this even possible? I'm not sure. And to have a 23% malt in the composition, and I'm not getting any malt flavor. And this is plenty spicy. It's as spicy as James E. Pepper 1776 rye, and that's 100 proof. But this has got the cinnamon thing going on. Where does that even come from? So it's got lots of spiciness. It's got strong rye flavor, and sometimes with the spicy ryes, you don't have the rye flavor as much. This has got both, so that kind of is a plus. So it's quite good, all in all. It's just very different from what I expected. But this has got a mouthful of flavor going on here. I'm going to say 23 out of 25 points for flavor and taste. I mean, this is really pretty good. Mouthfeel and finish. Okay, I think this is running hotter than its 92 proof would lead you to think. And that's a good thing for me. This has got good heat and spice. Moderately oily in the mouthfeel. It gets just a little bit of a burn up in the sinuses, which I like. You know, researching this, people said it's smooth. I'm not sure, you know, the whole definition of smooth is kind of weird. I'm not usually a big fan of smooth. I like the hot, spicy thing. And this has got plenty of that. So I'm not sure if you like a smooth rye, this may not be the thing for you, because this has got a lot of spice and it's got some heat to it. Man, I like it. I mean, this is great. This is really good. The finish is pretty long. The cinnamon note, because that cinnamon comes in strong at the tail end, the back of the palate, that's what lingers. Okay, so I'm getting the spiciness and the cinnamon for a long finish. And so that's a positive. Man, 14 out of 15 for mouthfeel finish. Absolutely. So now let's talk price and value. I got this at Total Wine, and it's listed on their website at $45.99. I think that's about what I paid for it several months ago, half a year ago. January, maybe February when I got this. Goody, it's listed on their website at $33.99, but see, that's not going to be the single barrel reserve. So really, you can only get this one at Total Wine. And again, you know, this is a single barrel, so that, you know, they may be out, right? So this is 319R. And so that's the deal with single barrels is, hey, you get one and that's the last one you're going to get, right? But Goody does have their rye listed, but I'm not seeing it on, and the website says it's not available, you know, so they list it but say they're out, right? Specs doesn't even carry it. Doesn't even carry Herman Marshall. So I'm not sure how that works. Why would Specs not carry Herman Marshall? I don't know. The whole liquor business thing, there's some mystery involved there, you know, about why something is noted as Herman Marshall is not carried in all three liquor stores. I couldn't tell you. But so availability is going to take a hit here. For the value, you know, I paid $45.99 or thereabouts for this single barrel. And this is a pretty good rye. I'm going to say it's worth it. It's a craft whiskey and rye, and I like rye, and it's a single barrel. So I'm going to say $45.99 is a good, just price here. Availability, of course, is going to be down because it's a store select for Total Wine. So, you know, that's going to adversely affect the score, but 7 out of 10 for price, value, and availability. Neat or mixer. Now this is wonderful neat, and if you watch my videos, you know I drink neat all the time. I'm trying to branch out into the cocktail stuff. In my estimation, as strong as the rye flavor is here, and at 92 proof, this should be outstanding in a cocktail. So I like it neat, but I think it would be great in a cocktail. So there you go, 5 out of 5 for neat or mixer. Bonus points, 5-point maximum. This gets my 5 points. And that outdoes the Distillery Reserve Bourbon at 117.5 that I did last time. This is, to me, a way better whiskey than that one. So 5 bonus points here for a total score of 88 points or an A-. And again, my recommendation, I really like this a whole lot more than that Distillery Reserve Bourbon. I probably need to find a 92 proof bourbon and give it a fair shake, because I think the proof point on that bourbon ruined it. You know, I've done some high proof things and liked them, but I tend to prefer things under about 105. 80 to 105 is kind of my range, I think. So anyway, I highly recommend this. If you like rye whiskeys, man, this is a good one. If you want to try some Texas rye, here you go. But keep in mind, it does not have the Texas funk. It just doesn't have it. So in conclusion, this Herman Marshall Texas Rye will be very interesting when I do the Texas Whiskey Tournament that I'm planning for this fall or winter. This is a strong rye that's going to compete well with Tabacaro, Balcones, or Acre Texas ryes. So I'm looking forward to that tournament if I ever get there this fall or winter. But for right now, that's all for Stab the Dragon. If you drink, don't drive. If you're not 21, don't drink. Drink responsibly. Out here.